Hello everyone, this is Final Lugia Guardian. Today I'm going to be doing a series called Old Camera versus New Camera. Basically what this is going to be is I'm going to take a camera from last decade and compare it with a camera from this decade to see what the specs are relative to one another, and then I'm going to make a proclamation of the overall value. So how this is going to work is I'm going to start by discussing the size and weight of each camera. Then I'm going to discuss the resolution of each camera, that is their still resolution. I'll get into video later. Then I'm going to discuss their burst rate, the number of photos they can take in 1 second, the buffer, that is how many photos they can take before their internal memory fills up and they have to offload it onto the card before they can take more pictures, the ISO of each, both how far you can push the ISO and the quality of the camera's image at each ISO setting. The sensitivity to light is what ISO is, just for those who don't do DSLR stuff much. Then I'm going to discuss the battery capacity of each camera. That's the number of photos you can take before you have to take the battery out and recharge it or put in a new battery. Then I'm going to talk about the kit lens on each of these cameras. Then I'm going to talk about the ease of the user interface of each camera. So that's the menus and the mode selections. Then I'm going to discuss video resolution of each of these cameras. Then I'm going to discuss the frame rate of those video resolutions of each of these cameras. Then I'm going to discuss the recording time limit of each of these cameras. And then I'm going to discuss the image quality for stills of each of these cameras. Overall, that's a bit subjective. Then I'm going to discuss the overall image quality of the video of each of these cameras. Once again, this will be a bit subjective as well. Then I'm going to discuss briefly the accessories available for each of these cameras. And then I'm going to make a proclamation of the overall value of each of these cameras, and which one is better for the money. So, without further ado, let's introduce the first camera. Manufactured in Japan in 2006, is the first DSLR I ever owned. This is the Canon EOS Rebel XT. Camera number 2 is going to be manufactured in 2013, also in Japan, is the Canon EOS Rebel SL1. So, there is quite a number of years difference in between when these were each made. And the differences in the technology advances since then are going to become rather apparent pretty soon. So let us start with the resolution of each camera. The resolution of the Canon EOS Rebel XT is 8 megapixels on its APS-C size sensor. That's the crop sensor for Canon, and it's a 1.6 crop when compared with full-frame sensors like the Canon 5D Mark III and 5D Mark IV and 1DX Mark II and 6D and whatever other cameras that Canon has released that have full-frame sensors by the time this video gets released, or after. The sensor on the Canon Rebel SL1 is an 18 megapixel APS-C size sensor. Well, technically it's 17.9 megapixels. But most people say that it's an 18 megapixel sensor because it's so close. So that means you are going to have double the resolution on this camera when compared with this camera. So you're going to have a much larger print that you can make from this than this. Now let's talk about the burst rate for each camera. This could shoot 3 frames per second max. This could shoot 4 frames per second max. And then, of course, this is when you have the camera in burst mode. 4 frames per second for this, 3 frames per second for that. Then you have the buffer for each camera. 14 shots when you're shooting in JPEG only in your burst mode. 20 shots when you're shooting in JPEG only for this one. Now, it's large JPEG for both of them, so I'm not taking raw photos. And that's as fast as you can make them go with those settings. So, what does that mean? Well, 3 seconds for this and 14 seconds total. 3 frames per second and 14 seconds is going to give you just over 4 seconds. 4 frames per second for 20 photos is going to give you about 5 seconds with this. So a little bit longer you can shoot with for this, and at a higher burst rate and higher resolution for each of those stills. So this thing is going to smoke the Rebel XT. But in my experience, the Rebel XT, I never had too much of a problem capturing high quality still images in burst mode. You just have to sort of plan a little bit in advance and not have things moving too fast. But if you want to capture things at a little bit faster speed, or make sure you have extra frames to make sure you got the image you want, this is going to be your camera. Now let's talk about the, well, I already discussed the Already discussed the buffer. Let's discuss the ISO. The ISO is the sensitivity to light. Max ISO on this is 1600. Max ISO on this is 12,000. So, yeah, you have the ability to go, 12,800. You actually can push this one stop further if you fool around with the settings, but if you do that, you're going to have a whole bunch of noise. The image is basically going to be unusable. But of course, you will have an image, whereas with the Rebel XT, you're just going to be in the dark. There's no way around it. Anyway, the ISO, high ISO on this, I really wouldn't push this beyond 400 ISO, because then you start to have noise creep into it, but I have used ISO 800 on this camera, and I've gotten good results with really just sort of a fine grain. And if you don't have the image really large, you can really even get by with 1600 ISO on this. You push this thing to 1600, the image is going to look pretty much unusable. You will have an image though, and you can see something, so I don't know, pick your poison on this one. So let's now talk about the battery capacity for each of these shots. Well, this is actually going to be an area where the Canon Rebel XT has an advantage, believe it or not. The max I've ever been able to get out of this camera is 500 shots, or around that. Canon actually advertises a little bit higher than that, but me personally, I've never been able to get more than 500, which is not bad. 500 shots will get you shooting all day. Now, of course, how I ended up finding this out was when I was in Alaska with my family. I took this thing shooting while we were on the cruise ship, and I just shot pretty much all day, shot about 280 photos, and then we went into land, and of course I shot and shot and shot, and then of course I got up to about 500 shots, and then the battery let me know it was exhausted. So unfortunately I could not shoot anymore. So just recharge your battery with this thing, and whenever you go out, recharge it every day. You'll be good. You'll never run out of shots if you're like most people. If you're like a professional, I can see that that might be a problem, and maybe you need something that shoots 1,000 shots like the Canon 5D Mark III. The number of photos you can take with this before you need to recharge the battery is 340. Now, I have never shot more than 180 photos on any given day with this camera. I've just never had a need to shoot anywhere close to 340 photos. Once again, though, if you are like a professional photographer, maybe you do need 1,000 shots, in which case maybe it's worth scaling up to a 5D Mark III or a 5D Mark IV. But once again, just recharge your battery for both these cameras. Both of them will be good, but advantage Canon Rebel XT. Let's now move on to the next category, the kit lens. Both of these come with an 18 to 55mm kit lens. These are an EFS lens, which means they only mount on the crop sensor Canon bodies, so they only mount on the APS-C size bodies, and they cannot mount on the full-frame DSLRs like the 5D Mark III, 5D Mark IV, 1DX Mark II, the 60. These two lenses, neither of them will work on those cameras. They will work on any EFS camera, though, so any Rebel, anything like the Canon 70D or Canon 80D, those will be fine. These lenses will both interchange with each camera. This will interchange and work on here, both for stills and video, and this lens will work on here, but since the STM system is not supported by this camera, you're not going to be having those smooth focus pulls that you can with this camera. So just be aware of that. Now let's talk about the one other thing I forgot about the lens. This is an image stabilized lens. This is not. So if you're holding the camera up and shooting video, and you're just slowly and sort of maybe subtly shaking the camera, this will stabilize the image a bit. Whereas if you're holding this and you're shooting video, pretend that this is shooting video, you're subtly shaking the camera, it's going to look like you're shooting video in a freaking earthquake. Once again, not a big problem for stills as long as you use a high enough shutter speed. So if you're shooting stills, this will probably still be fine. Every bit as good as this. Now let's talk about the ease of the user interface. Well, let's talk about first the mode dials. All the way up to even the T4i Rebels. Let me just freaking... Alright, there we go. If you wanted to change the mode dial, you could turn it and turn it and turn it and turn it, and then it would stop. Then you'd have to turn it back the other way. So that's a little bit of an inconvenience because, of course, with the SL1, you can just turn it all the way around, and it doesn't stop. Most of the time, I just leave my camera in manual mode because I like to change all the settings manually. And let's go ahead and put this back in manual mode as well. Okay. Now let's discuss the menu system of each. Well, on the SL1 you have a touch screen. On the Canon Rebel you don't. You have this really tiny screen that you have to control using these buttons here. Now, each of these buttons actually will allow you to quickly change settings, like ISO here, white balance here. Whereas if you want to change ISO, that's on the top for the SL1, and it is on the bottom right here for the it's on the back right here for the XT. So just where do you want it? In order to change the white balance, though, on this you actually have to turn the camera on, of course, and then select auto white balance from the screen and adjust your auto white balance from there. So having a touchscreen, though, this really makes things convenient, and of course having a screen where you can see these really large photos that you just took on here, whereas this tiny one here on the Rebel, this one is much better for the interface, I think. There is one thing that this has an advantage, though, a little back screen right here, which if you want this kind of screen on a Rebel, you're going to have to step up all the way to the T6S, which is a very expensive camera. Not that this wasn't expensive when it was first released, but if you want a second screen, which will of course be mounted on the top, like around this area, on the T6S and 70D and 80D, you're going to have to pay up. So overall user interface, even having this, I think doesn't save this camera from having a worse user interface than this thing with its touchscreen, and it's a large touchscreen, mind you. It's big menu buttons, its image button right here. The only thing that I can think of that this is a definite advantage of is that, well, you can use the trash can right here. And of course this is a small logo, but this thing uses SDXC cards. SDXC cards are going to be able to hold much more data in general for the same price than compact flash cards, which this camera uses. Also, they're going to be more readily available than compact flash cards. So that's a little bit of a deviation from the ease of the user interface. So overall, for user interface, the Canon SL1 is also going to smoke the Rebel XT. Now let's talk about the video resolution. The video resolution of the Rebel SL1 is 1920 by 1080p at either 24 frames per second, well 23.98 NTSC format, or 29.97, that's the 30 frames per second NTSC format at 1080p also. So you also have the ability to go down to 720p, 1280 by 720, at 60 frames per second, well 59.94 frames per second NTSC format. And you have the ability to shoot 30 frames per second, 29.97 frames per second at 480p, 640 by 480 on this. And of course the maximum bit rate that this is going to record is 44 megabits per second, and this is in MOV format, which of course is Apple's format, but it's okay. It does eat up a lot of data, more so than the standard MP4 format, which uses the H.264 codec, but it's fine. I've never had any problems with it. I've never had a problem with running out of memory with this thing. Now let's talk about the video on the Canon Rebel XT. The Canon Rebel XT shoots a maximum resolution of 0 by 0p at 0 megabits per second. And it will shoot for a maximum recording time of 0 seconds, whereas the SL1 shoots 29 minutes and 59 seconds. So in other words, the XT doesn't take video. And keep in mind, this was released in 2006. A full 2 years before the Canon 5D Mark II, the first Canon DSLR to do video. So, yeah, unfortunately you're stuck with just stills with this thing. SL1 wins. Now we're going to talk about the image quality for stills. Alright, so this is going to be where I get into a little bit of subjectivity. For daylight photos, and where you're not publishing in like a 4K timeline on your videos, you're going to have subjectively a hard time determining of which one is better than the other if you're just like on a 1080p timeline for video. In daylight only. In bright daylight at low ISO numbers, this will be comparable to this. So 8 megapixels versus 18 megapixels, yeah. Overall, this is going to be slightly better though, if you're really looking for them. Where, of course, this thing falls apart is low light. Even at ISO 100 in low light, you will still see a whole bunch of grain here, really just nasty noise. And at 100 ISO, with a properly exposed image, even in low light, you actually can get a noise-free image with this thing. So in low light, this thing is going to smoke this thing. So XT is going to lose in low light for image quality, and it's just going to be comparable in really good light at low ISOs. So now let's talk about the image quality for video. This SL1 wins because it shoots video. The XT loses because it does not shoot video. Okay, image quality for video out of the way. Now let's briefly talk about the accessories each of these have. Okay, you'll notice that each have a hot shoe mount, so you can mount an external flash on both of them if you don't want to use the onboard flash. You could mount mics on top of these things. This thing has a mic port. Of course, this thing doesn't shoot video, so there's no need to have a mic mounted on there. You have a standard tripod mount on both of them, so just be aware of that. Both of them have the standard tripod mount. You also can interchange lenses, as I mentioned before, and that's pretty much about it. One other thing. You can, okay, I think a micro HDMI here. Unfortunately, you don't have a headphone jack, so you can't monitor your audio on this thing, but it is what it is. It's a really cheap camera for, well, cheap for a DSLR. But overall, I've never had any problems with those limitations. Now that I've discussed accessories, let's discuss the value overall. Okay, well, we'll have to bring price into this. When this was new, you could find it for around $999.99. However, we're not talking about 2006. We're talking about 2016. And this you can pick up online for a little over $100. Add-on a lens for $70. Really, you'd probably find this particular lens for around $60. So you're around, I don't know, $180 for this thing. However, if you get it and it's broken, you're just stuck with what you got. Whereas you can actually still buy this camera from Canon's website, and it will give you a full Canon warranty with it, and a kit lens. I paid $369 for this camera, and so literally you're not paying that much more, and if you really just are pinching pennies, you can get a Canon Rebel T5, which uses a Digic 4 processor, 2 generations newer than the Digic 2 processor in this one, and you will have a camera that can also shoot video and shoot stills at the same resolution as this camera. So, literally for about like $70 more, you could get a Canon T5 and just be so much better than this thing. So, overall value for the money, you know, video you can shoot on this, full HD, mind you. No video on this at all, high resolution, better noise performance. There really is no reason to buy a Canon Rebel XT unless you're just intentionally trying to limit yourself to learn the fundamentals. So, overall, the better value for the money overall, and the better value for the money of today, even just price considered. Even though it's higher, the Canon SL1 unquestionably is the better value. If you're really pinching pennies, get a Canon T5. You'll be almost as good as this, and certainly a lot better than this. So, that's my proclamation. The old moves away, and the winner is the newer camera. So, thank you for watching this brief comparison video of the old generation of Canon DSLRs and the new generation of Canon DSLRs. I hope you have found this video informative and entertaining. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day. Until next time, take care. Peace.